we became...
I feel like everyone has a game that comes to bite them in the end. One that you've hyped yourself up for, only to be disappointed by reality. Aliens Colonial Marines is that game for me. As a teen, I was a huge Aliens fan. Alien is among my favorite sci-fi horror films. Aliens is one of the best sequels of all time. Alien 3 has some cool ideas like how the xenomorph's form is dependent on the host. The rest are, Needless to say, when Aliens Colonial Marines was coming out of development hell, I was ecstatic. I had great prior experiences with the Aliens vs Predator games. To top it off, Gearbox was going to be making it. My friends and I had devoted a ton of time to Borderlands back in the day. You bet I pre-ordered that game. Yeah, you heard me right. I pre-ordered Aliens Colonial Marines. I paid the full $60 in 2013. Now, Mr. Pitchford might want you to believe
it was probably one of those 7.5 kind of games that came out right after we did Borderlands. And so everybody wanted a 9. It had all this expectation. It's one of those expectation management things.
But the game was not what had been expected. Noticeably poor textures, entirely different lighting, boring gameplay, and non-existent AI led to a bad experience. And that was just on the surface. There are many small problems and inconsistencies that add up over time. One of my personal favorites is the silly idle shadow animation. It's been there since launch day and will never be fixed. It's indicative of a game that needed at least another pass or two for polish. Now, I'll be perfectly honest. I originally stopped playing the campaign after the second level, because on top of my crushing disappointment, the game just wasn't fun. I mean, the best part was the tactile multiplayer. It was Colonial Marines vs Xenos in 4 varied game modes. I have no footage of it because it's fairly dead and I couldn't get a match going. Now, you might be thinking, how did this happen? Aren't Gearbox supposed to be good at making games? That's debatable. Remember when I talked about development hell? Well, this is advanced development hell, because Aliens Colonial Marines was technically in development for 12 years. I say technically because Gearbox was not involved in the project until 2007. The original Colonial Marines is a failed EA project announced in 2001. A PS2 prototype from 2002 exists, but that was the extent of development from my research. Sega would buy the rights to publish games for the Alien franchise in 2006, and would approach Gearbox to develop a title for them. Before I go any further, I just want to say that a majority of the upcoming section is based on the work of Jason Schreier. Specifically, an article he wrote for Kotaku in 2013. It's a great article and I recommend reading it. Development began when Gearbox outsourced Demiurge Studios to make a prototype in 2007. Demiurge would also assist in the networking and multiplayer for the game. Gearbox spent a lot of time modding Unreal 3 with a custom lighting renderer. At some point, Nerve Software contributed some multiplayer maps. And that was the extent of the amount of work done on Aliens Colonial Marines for the first 3 years of development. Gearbox was instead focusing on Borderlands and Duke Nukem Forever. Am I gonna have to play it at some point? God, I hope not. Borderlands ended up being far more successful than anyone had planned. Development of Borderlands 2 began not long after the release of the first. It was about here someone seems to have had an oh shit moment, because as Sega filed in court, Gearbox had received millions in advanced royalties during the development of Aliens Colonial Marines. Sega likely wanted results, and Gearbox knew they didn't have time to produce milestones. It's either that, or Sega came knocking, saw nothing had been done, and applied pressure to Gearbox to actually start development. You don't mess around with the Yakuza, Randy. Development was then outsourced to Section 8 developer Timegate Studios. Section 8 was like a proto-Titanfall in some ways. Timegate took over development of Aliens Colonial Marines in 2010 and quickly realized that almost nothing had been done in the 3 years prior. Problems began to show quickly in development. Any work Timegate did had to be approved by both Sega and Gearbox. Gearbox also had some level of oversight over development at the same time. A lot of work Timegate did was for nothing. Entire levels would be scrapped or repurposed after narrative plot points were abandoned, which is kind of insane that they were writing the script while making the game. That's usually one of the first things you're supposed to do. They had over 3 years to finalize a draft and couldn't. Oh, and thanks Sega as to why there are so many humans to shoot in an Aliens game. They wanted the Call of Duty audience. Gearbox and Timegate objected, but Sega pulled the I'm funding this card. Then comes the infamous E3 trailer and demo. The trailer is incredibly high fidelity with surprising attention to detail and dynamic lighting work for a short presentation piece. The trailer contains bits and pieces of the first level, but the final version of the game looked almost nothing like the trailer shown off. And then there's the demo. It's a great demo for a different game. Very little of what is in the demo they showed off is even in the final game. Power loaders are treated as an afterthought in the released version, yet here they are as the stinger of the gameplay demo. Behind the scenes, the game's graphical fidelity was improved for the trailer and the press demo. What sounds to be very high-end rendering computers were used to play both the trailer and demo at E3. This created the unrealistic expectation of what Colonial Marines would look like on release, because they were telling us it was gameplay footage. The visual increase would become a major problem in development. To fit the performance budget for the 7th generation consoles, this fidelity had to be greatly sacrificed. Specifically the texture sizes and the look of the shaders and particles. You know, the thing they spent almost 3 years on at the beginning of development? When Gearbox took back the reins of the project in 2012, the game was in a terrible state. Allegedly, it was not able to run on the PS3. At this point, it was 9 months before the game was supposed to release. There was no chance of an extension from Sega because the game had already been long delayed. Gearbox would crunch for 9 months to finish the game. Who made what in the final product is ambiguous at best. Randy said that Timegate were around for 20 to 25% of the game's development, but did about as much work as Gearbox. Former Timegate devs claimed that they made about 50% of the shipped product. My point in laying out the oversimplified history of Aliens Colonial Marines development is to hopefully give you a sense that things went very sideways during the tumultuous 6 years of development. And to not believe a word out of Randy Pitchford's mouth. He is a liar who will knowingly release a bad product and tell you it's good in an effort to take your money. Randy likes to claim that he lost 10 to 15 million out of his own pocket to get Aliens Colonial Marines shipped. But don't forget that he misused money from Sega to fund Borderlands and the worst Duke Nukem game in the first place. So, 1,246 words later, I can actually start talking about the game. Visually, it's simultaneously impressive and disappointing. The environmental design is fantastic, and it really does look like I'm in the Alien universe at times. Hadley's Hope is probably my favorite of the environments. The xenomorphs look faithful and some of the variants are intriguing. Despite my complaints, I do like the lighting in some areas. The weapon models all attempt to fit the original art style and I dig it. There's even a set piece section with the alien queen that is legitimately cool looking. But that's really about the extent of the good. A major complaint I have with the visuals is the overpowering blue filter. I really don't like it because every other color ends up looking muted or off. Even if I've turned the film grain effect off, there's still like a slight fuzziness to the visuals. I almost feel like I'm playing the game on a CRT TV. Colonial Marines is also very dark. I mean, it's aliens, it should be dark. But I should have a bright flashlight to compensate for the darkness. Instead, I have one of those wind-up flashlights that don't go past 4 feet. The texture work is pretty subpar when compared to contemporaries. If you haven't noticed by now, the gun also takes up a considerable amount of visual space. At least they look good. Some of the character models are on the ugly side for the time. And there were some really abstract looking people in some 7th generation console games. O'Neill is among the uglier character models I've ever seen. He looks more like an oversized fantasy dwarf than a person. Colonial Marines is stable for the most part. It didn't hitch much or crash at all during my playtime. However, there is one really annoying bug that exists in the PC version. If you try to quit the game, it will relaunch itself, trapping you in a loop of trying to close the game. The only way I know how to fix it is to either reset your computer or to always run the game's exe as an admin. That way it has to at least ask before trying to relaunch itself. It's been an issue since launch and will likely never be fixed. I also have a recording specific gripe with Aliens Colonial Marines. Every time I would relaunch the game, my resolution would reset, so I'd have to fix it each and every time I played the game. I record at 1080p, and it kept defaulting to my monitor's native 1440p. The sound is really hit or miss for me. I'm almost certain there's some Aliens music in the soundtrack. Most of the music doesn't really have a huge impact on the experience overall, now that I think about it. Like, I can't pick out any specific tracks that I like from memory. I really hate the sound of the pulse rifle when it fires. It's a loop of the sound from the movies, but the sound doesn't match the animation. Most of the other weapon sounds are really lacking in bass and tend to fall pretty flat. The voice acting is really whatever. Travis Willingham of Colonel Mustang fame is O'Neill, and actors Lance Henriksen and Michael Biehn reprise their respective characters in the story. That's the extent of who I recognize right away.
There's a colony called Hadley's Hope not too far from here. Well, what's left of it. Now shortwaves don't work for shit down here. Look, we need to find a way to regroup anyone that made it off the Sulaco.
No one's performance is really astounding. It often sounds more like everyone is saying the lines to collect a paycheck.
The tranquilizers we've introduced into her food supply seem to be keeping her docile. Relatively.
The gameplay is split between combat with enemies and moving through linear environments to complete objectives. It's usually typing on a keyboard to activate something. My playthrough was on the hardened or hard difficulty. The two main enemies you fight are the classic xenomorphs and Wei-Yu mercenaries. Both types of enemies aren't much fun to fight. The xenomorph AI is so poor that they tend to just focus only on the player and ignore friendly NPCs. It's to the point that I very rarely felt like I was being hunted. I felt more like an exterminator fighting the aliens. The Xenos deal a ton of damage while also tanking a fair amount. Your best bet is to kill them from range. Beware of their leaps because they will knock you down into a quicktime event that will kill you fast. They also have an effect where their acid blood can hurt you, but only sometimes. Other times it seems to have almost no effect. There are a number of different alien variants to fight in the game. These include the Spitter, the Crusher, Lurkers, and Boilers. The Boilers feature in my favorite part of the game, which is surprisingly the sewer level. It's unique amongst all the other levels as it consists of the game taking away your weapons and forcing you to stealth past these blind kamikaze freaks.
Damn, man! You didn't tell me those guys exploded.
They exploded?
Additionally, there are facehuggers to shoot in a few sections that aren't completely terrible. They usually just devolve into blasting eggs before a thing crawling on the floor can try to latch onto my face again. The Merc AI also dampens the fun because the enemies tend to move to predetermined places or suicide charge at you. They rarely try to flank or take cover sensibly. They come in only two varieties, normal and heavily armored. The only real difference is in how much damage they take. They do at least serve as distractions for when you end up in three-way fights with the xenomorphs. The friendly NPC AI are practically useless. They can damage enemies, but I think the amount of damage they do is minuscule. The only real use I have for them is as distractions and meat shields for the enemies chasing after me. They also tend to get stuck in places or fall behind, resulting in the game warping them around. Something very funny about this game also stems from the AI. A modder by the name of James Dickinson 963 made a discovery in 2017 and posted about it on ModDB. Turns out there's a typo in the code that makes the AI worse. You can make the changes yourself and yeah, the AI is a little bit better. It's still not great, but it's better than it was. Before I talk about guns, I want to talk about health, armor, and depth. Your health is tracked in a bar in the bottom left and is segmented into 3 sections. Colonial Marines does a really weird compromise between a health bar and regenerating health. Your health will regenerate within the segments, but if you lose an entire pip of your health, it's not coming back without a health pickup. These pickups are usually few and far between, forcing you to rely on armor pickups instead. Armor is tracked in the little bar above the health bar. It absorbs damage in place of your health, but it doesn't absorb more than a few shots or 2 alien swipes. This is compensated by armor pickups being everywhere, but my armor was often gone within the next combat encounter. When your armor and health go down to nothing, you usually fall over and the screen turns gray. The game will then invariably look like it's breaking for a few seconds before loading the last checkpoint. Many of these checkpoints are spaced far apart from each other, leading to frustration when playing the same segment of gameplay only to die and do it again. I didn't die too often, but it was miserable when I did. The only way to prevent your untimely demise is with the game's arsenal. The weapons are really a mixed bag. Most of them suck due to excessive weapon sway. I can't really aim worth anything if my gun keeps moving around while I'm aimed down the sight. It actually ended up being more accurate to hip fire at distance than to try and aim sometimes, which is really confusing to me. Why would they add the aim down sights mode if you can't aim with it? Every weapon is upgradable, allowing you to customize your weapons as you see fit as your level increases. Yes, there is a leveling system. The customizations and weapons you earn in campaign carry over to the multiplayer. Each of these weapons has multiple secondary weapons that I'm not going to go over, otherwise I would be here all day. Just know that these are often problem solvers. Weirdly, you are limited to 2 weapons and a pistol, but are able to swap those at any time by holding B. It pulls up a radial menu where you can change your entire arsenal in the middle of combat. It's a really weird design choice, but I understand why it was made. The game's ammo drops are random. A player needs to conceivably finish a mission even if they run out of ammo for the weapons they are actively using. The problem is that the game's difficulty melts away because I can just switch to whatever weapon fits the situation at a moment's notice. The pulse rifle was my workhorse weapon through most of the campaign. It wasn't incredibly accurate, but it dealt a panda load of damage. something CinemaSin about the ammo counter being different in the movie. The assault rifle is a 3-burst weapon that was my long-range backup for when I ran out of pulse rifle ammo. It's also what the majority of the mercenaries seem to be shooting you with. The battle rifle is a semi-auto rifle that I mostly use to kill things from a long way away. I really hate the firing sound of this gun because it really feels like there should have been far more bass. The submachine gun is alright. It fires insanely quickly, but is near useless outside of a short range due to the wild recoil. There are 2 standard shotguns, a pump action and a semi-auto. The pump action is better in my opinion, but I didn't use either in favor of the game's legendary shotgun. Legendary weapons are more powerful versions of the base weapon and are usually used by characters in the movies. You find them hidden in the environment along with collectible dog tags of the Marines who died in Aliens. I didn't find all the weapons or tags because I was nowhere near invested enough to attempt it. There are 2 heavy weapons that the game rarely used and I really wish I had them more. You can't mod them, you cannot acquire more ammo for them, and will drop them when switching to a different weapon. The first is the iconic smart gun. There is only a single section in the game where you're guaranteed to use a smart gun. It is one of the few highlights of Colonial Marines. The other heavy weapon is the incinerator, which is really cool looking but has absolutely no range. Despite real-life flamethrowers having a range of about 65 feet or 20 meters for my metric homeboys. I know there aren't many of you out there, but I still feel like I need to make peace with you savages. On a last note, there are 2 pistols, but I only ever use them in a panic or when knocked down by Xenos. The iconic motion tracker has its cameo in this game too. Its purpose is to function as a radar and to guide you through the environment. The lack of range on the tracker makes it more of a where do I need to go button akin to the one from Dead Space. Which is disappointing because I thought it would have been used as a tool to fight aliens hunting you. There are 2 token power loader sections in the game. One lasts 20 seconds and is your tutorial to power loading. The other is a boss fight about midway through the game. And yes, it is really frustrating to have to suddenly fight a boss using a vehicle I used for less than a minute several hours prior. That boss fight is so stupidly hard because of that. I think I spent nearly a half hour just bashing my head against this fight. Disappointingly, the flamethrower-equipped power loader is absent from the final release. If I could sum up the story in a word, it would be silly. This game is canonically a part of the Aliens universe and is a canon sequel to Aliens. Not like that Alien Cubed movie. It's really dumb. And not even the good kind of dumb. The game prominently features the Sulaco and Hadley's Hope as locations in the story. Here's a short clip from the end of Aliens as to why that's really dumb. So yeah, Hadley should have been vaporized. Even the story knows the premise is dumb because characters make reference to it.
Are we to believe Wayland boarded the ship and brought it back here? Why would they do that? That doesn't make any sense.
No, it most certainly doesn't.
That, combined with a number of other inconsistencies, make it really obvious they slapped a script together and never thought of how it would fit into official canon. Most of the characters you meet are one-dimensional caricatures that try to fit soldier archetypes, like the hotshot pilot, or the tough lady, or the grizzled commander. The only person with any kind of character development is O'Neill, and he just becomes sad and angry by the end.
I guess they should have thought of that before their actions led to the death of 300 Marines. Do it.
If you want to avoid spoilers, go here. I really don't blame them for wanting to skip this section. The USS Sulaco somehow makes it back to LV-426 after being hijacked by Wei-Yu mercenaries around Fury 161. The Merc's objective was to kidnap Corporal Hicks from cryosleep. It had something to do with learning more about the Xenos and getting access codes to the Sulaco. Some other guy was used as a body double in the cryopods that are ejected toward Fury 161. This all occurs in DLC that you shouldn't buy and is considered canonical. Yep, Hicks is now alive and Newt is still extra dead. Gotta save the one with star power, I guess. Fast forward some weeks, and the USS Sephora is responding to the Sulaco's distress signal. Marines board the ship to find it overrun with xenomorphs and mercenaries. The Sulaco opens fire on the Sephora. This results in the deaths of all those unable to evacuate off the Sephora. The survivors escape the now crashing Sulaco in dropships that also crash onto the planet below. All this time we are playing a character named Captain Winters. No, I don't know his first name. Our buddy O'Neill follows us around along with O'Neill's girlfriend Bella. Bella woke up with a facehugger dead next to her. You can imagine how her character arc goes. The survivors of the crash include the characters above, a bishop android, the commanding officer crews, a dropship pilot, and a scattering of Marines across the planet. The Marines set up shop in Hadley's Hope and engage in recreation with the new neighbors. Eventually, you are tasked to go rescue some captured Marine and see if there might be a way to cure Bella, because as Bishop says,
Bella, you're gonna die.
at the Wagyu facility, we learn some more kinda dumb canon about how the facehuggers inject a placental-like cancer to gestate chestbursters in their victims. Removal also apparently kills the host. Bella dies like a second later, and O'Neill undergoes his character development. You have that really cool scene I mentioned earlier with the Queen, and fight your way through the Derelict. The Derelict is visually cool despite this lame game. You save the lucky Marine who turns out to be Hicks. This is where the game gives you the plot dump I did at the beginning of the spoiler section. The objective of the game from here on becomes trying to get on the only Wagyu ship with an FTL drive. There's some boring stuff in between, but it's really all the same schlock you've been playing up until this point. The game ends with a boss fight with the Queen. When I saw her climb aboard the ship, I thought it was dumb, but was like, oh cool, maybe I'll have another power loader fight. Something to break up the gameplay a bit. Nope, hit 4 switches and blast her out the hole. You don't even get the satisfaction of killing her, because your commander kamikazes her with a busted shuttle. Oddly, there seems to be no one on the ship to stop you until you find a Wayland that looks like a bishop. Hicks shoots him with O'Neill's gun, and surprise, he was an android! Your bishop downloads the dead bot's memory, says they got everything, and the game ends on a cliffhanger that will probably never be resolved. I say probably, but I bet in like 10 to 15 years someone will make some kind of sequel or retcon it with a remake. It's all the rage these days. Oddly enough, there's a near complete overhaul for this game by Templar GFX. I played a bit of it to see what it was like, and honestly, the results are mixed. The mod makes a lot of audio, visual, and balance changes along with a few fixes. Right away you should notice that the gun is no longer taking up so much real estate on the screen. My flashlight actually works past 3 feet. The lighting is much more in line with the original trailer for the game. A few of the weapons sounded a little better. A myriad of environmental details stuck out to me more in the overhaul than in the base game. Most notably was that the bodies of dead enemies no longer dissolved into dust. Games usually do this in an effort to save on performance budget. Although this led to many bodies being stuck in some very odd places. Enemies also went from favoring attacking me to deciding they'd rather hang out on a nearby wall staring at me. There were a few script triggers that went off late or not at all, but that's really the consequences of modding an already jank game. After playing with the overhaul, I don't think I would recommend it for a first-time player. It's definitely worth using for a returning player, but it adds more problems than are worth dealing with for your first time. In conclusion, Aliens Colonial Marines is a game with a shitstorm development that resulted in a poor product. It's boring to play, the story is nonsense, and the only redeeming feature this game had is no longer accessible. Colonial Marines is the game that made me really begin taking a critical eye toward what games I spent my money on. It sure taught me to never pre-order a video game ever again. Aliens Colonial Marines is not worth the $60 I spent, nor is it worth any money you might be able to spend on it. Especially since you can only buy the game in a collection with all the DLC for $30 on Steam. So unless you want to wait for a Steam sale to buy this overpriced canon garbage, I would give this one a hard pass. Thanks for watching.